They made one final request to God, and he listened. In the dim light of a modest room in Amarillo, Texas, two wrinkled hands remained intertwined, one already cold, the other trembling. And there, under the soft glow of an old bedside lamp, something impossible happened. James didn't cry, didn't scream. He simply looked up at the ceiling, whispered, "Thank you," and closed his eyes. 10 hours later, he was gone. But this story doesn't start with death. It begins with a fallen necklace and a glance that changed the destiny of two souls forever. Amarillo, Texas, spring of 1946. The scent of sweet popcorn, sawdust, and cotton candy filled the air at the town's small spring fair. Booths with games and treats lit up the central square with vibrant colors, children's laughter, and country songs crackling from an old radio. Eleanor Mae Thompson, 17, strolled through the fair with her friends, giggling as they sampled candy apples and took silly pictures in a makeshift photo booth. A southern girl, raised on a farm, with eyes as green as the fields after rain. Around her neck, a delicate silver necklace with a star-shaped charm, a gift from her mother on her 16th birthday. Amid the crowd's excitement, the necklace slipped off unnoticed. It landed softly on the dirt path, right beside a grilled corn stand. On the other side of the square, James Harold Carter, 19, wore worn-out boots and a plaid shirt. He sold hay bales with his father by day and cleaned stables at night. A simple, quiet young man with eyes that noticed everything. When he saw something shiny on the ground, he bent down, picked it up, and looked around. Then he saw her. Eleanor stood just a few feet away, trying to keep her hair in place against the wind. James made his way through the crowd, the necklace carefully wrapped in his hand. "Ma'am, you dropped this," he said, his southern drawl soft, eyes locked on hers. She widened her eyes, touched her bare neck, and smiled in surprise. "Oh my goodness, that's mine. I didn't even notice." She took the necklace, but her fingers brushed his just a moment longer than they needed to. A strange silence settled between them. One of those silences that don't need words, because everything that needed to be said was already in their eyes. "I'm James," he said, not sure what else to add. "Eleanor," she replied, "but everyone calls me Ellie." They laughed, shared names, short stories, quick smiles. Time slowed down. The noise of the fair faded into the background. The world grew smaller. Only they existed. That night, James walked home with a folded piece of paper in his pocket, an address, and a heart that no longer belonged solely to him. And just like that, because of a fallen necklace, two souls met and would never part again. The summer of 1946 arrived like a warm breath from the Texas desert. The romance between James and Eleanor blossomed like a flame fed by glances, simple dates, and long talks on the wooden porch of her home. But the calm wouldn't last long. The war had left its scars, and although World War II had officially ended, the United States still deployed young men to military bases in Europe and the Pacific for occupation and patrol duties. It was during one of those calls that James received the letter. He had to report for an overseas assignment with the Army. Eleanor's world collapsed. On his last day before leaving, James showed up at her house with a wooden box. Inside, paper, envelopes, and stamps, dozens of them. He held Ellie's hands tightly and said, "Promise you'll write? Every week if you can. Even if it's just to remind me the world still has color." She cried but nodded. And so began one of the most beautiful letter exchanges Amarillo had ever seen. Eleanor's letters were sweet, sometimes funny, and often desperately romantic. She wrote about the smell of her mother's apple pies, about thunderstorms that scared the family dog, and about how she spent hours staring at the backyard swing where they used to talk. James's letters came smudged with dirt, some hurriedly written between shifts, but they always carried the same message between the lines. "It's still you. It's always been you." One day, Eleanor wrote, "If fate is cruel and you don't return, know this. I've already lived enough just by having loved you." He replied, "I'll return. Even if it's only to see your eyes one more time. Even if I have to walk across the ocean." 2 years passed, and despite the distance, despite the pain, their love not only survived, it bloomed. Like a flower growing through concrete, against all odds, despite everything. It was a clear morning in Amarillo when Eleanor heard the mail truck pull up in front of the house. She ran downstairs with her heart racing, just like she had for months, expecting another letter. But that day, something was different. It wasn't a letter. It was him. James stepped off the truck before the engine even stopped. He was thinner, sun-kissed, his eyes a little more tired, but his smile hadn't changed. Eleanor screamed. She ran and hugged him so tightly that the world seemed to vanish. "You came back," she whispered through tears. "Told you I would, didn't I?" he replied, holding her against his chest. That same week, they planned the wedding. Eleanor wanted something simple, just like she'd always dreamed. In her backyard, lanterns hanging between the trees, neighbors lending chairs, and her mother baking pies for everyone. The date they chose was special, James's 20th birthday. He said he wanted to celebrate two lives on the same day every year, his life and the life by her side. Eleanor's dress was handmade by an aunt, sewn from old lace with pearl buttons. James wore his father's suit, quickly tailored to fit. During the vows, James looked into her eyes and said, "I can't promise riches or a life without struggle, but I promise that as long as my heart beats, it's yours." There was laughter, tears, old songs, and a sunset that seemed painted just for them. That night, lying under a starry sky, James whispered, "Now, Ellie, the world makes sense." And she answered, "Now, we're complete." The first house James and Eleanor bought was small, a white wooden home with faded blue shutters, tucked into a quiet neighborhood in Amarillo. It had 2 bedrooms, a front garden, and a backyard with a sturdy oak tree that would later become the stage for countless memories. That's where life happened. Eleanor planted rose bushes along the fence. James built a swing with his own hands, tied to the strongest branch of the oak. The same swing that, years later, would see grandchildren running back and forth, laughing into the wind. Then came the children. First Sarah, then Michael, and finally little Emily. The house became small, noisy, alive. Eleanor cooked while listening to the radio, singing along with Patsy Cline as she baked peach pies and fried chicken. James came home dusty from work, but always found the energy to play with the kids in the yard before sunset. It was a simple routine, but it was absolutely filled with love. Friday nights were sacred, movie night at home, with popcorn popping on the stove and blankets spread across the living room floor. James always voted for westerns, while the kids begged for cartoons. Eleanor sat in the middle, laughing, pretending to be the judge of the family court. And Sundays, oh Sundays, they were days of full tables. Children, in-laws, grandchildren, all gathered together. James always insisted on saying grace before every meal, even if it was just a sandwich. He'd say, "Gratitude is the seasoning of life," and everyone would repeat it like a family mantra. Over time, the kids grew up, moved out, started families of their own, but they always came back, because that house was home. James and Eleanor had something rare, a love that didn't fade with time. When she laughed, he still looked at her like it was the first time. When he spoke, she still listened like every word was a gift. And at the heart of it all, the house. That house which, though small, held the greatest of worlds inside. A family, a story, and a love that echoed in every wall, every step, every memory. Over time, James and Eleanor's house became more than a home. It became a beacon, a kind of invisible shelter for anyone who needed help, emotional, spiritual, or material. It all started with a visit from their young neighbor, Mary Ann. She knocked on the right door one cold night, a baby in her arms, tears in her eyes. Abandoned by the baby's father, no job, no direction. Eleanor welcomed her like a daughter. James brought blankets and food. That night turned into weeks. The weeks became a mission. They decided to start a small community project, Hope and Hearth. It began in the backyard, with boxes of clothes and neighbor donations. Soon it grew. Volunteers came from nearby towns, doctors, counselors, teachers. Everyone wanted to help, but at the center of it all, there were always James and Eleanor. She comforted the mothers. He taught the teens how to fix furniture and plant gardens. He'd say, "If you learn to work with your hands, you'll never go hungry." Kids called him Mr. J and ran to hug him every time he arrived with his straw hat. Even with little money, they never said no. When the pantry went empty, James would say, "God will provide," and he always did. Sometimes with sacks of rice left on the porch, sometimes with anonymous envelopes under the door. The city of Amarillo began seeing the couple as heroes. But they never sought praise. They turned down awards, interviews, tributes. They said, "We're just giving back a little of what we were given." And indeed, they had received much. Love, smiles, and everlasting bonds. On Sundays after family lunch, they always left room at the table for any lonely visitor. James would clap his hands and say, "There's always a place here." And there always was. The house once filled with laughter was now also filled with hope. On the porch, a wooden sign carved by James read, "Here, no one walks alone." Time, which once seemed to move slowly in James and Eleanor's home, began to speed up. The children were grown, the grandchildren getting older, and Sunday lunches now echoed with younger voices, quicker, more connected to the world outside. But inside the house, silence had started to settle. It was on an ordinary morning that James first noticed something strange. Eleanor, wearing her apron, was making pancakes, her classic Saturday recipe. But as she reached for the salt, she froze, looked at the container, frowned, and asked, "James, what is this again?" He chuckled, thinking it was a joke. "It's salt, Ellie. You use it every week." She smiled back, but there was something in her eyes, an emptiness, a quiet between thoughts. At first, it was small forgettings, neighbors' names, the way to church, where she left her glasses. James tried to dismiss it, told himself it was just age, or maybe exhaustion. But the gaps grew, deeper, more frightening. One day she forgot Sarah's name, their eldest daughter. She called her the girl. Then she forgot how to turn on the bathroom faucet. Ran her hand along the wall, searching for something she no longer recognized. The diagnosis hit like a punch: Alzheimer's. James left the doctor's office with tears in his eyes and a crumpled brochure in his hand. He spent that night sitting in his armchair, staring at their wedding photo, as if trying to find a way in the past to hold on to the present. But he didn't give up. He turned the house into a sanctuary of care. Labels on cabinets, photos with names, schedules written everywhere. He learned to cook, to manage medication, to handle the confusion, and worse, the moments of clarity, when Eleanor cried because she knew she was fading. She spoke less and less, but the touch never left. James held her hand every day, even when she didn't know who he was. Sometimes she pulled away, sometimes she squeezed back, as if to say, "I don't know the name of your face, but I know the feel of your love." At night, he'd read aloud the letters they wrote in their youth, even without response, even unsure if she understood. One day, while reading an old letter, Eleanor whispered, "You came back." It was the first full sentence in weeks. James closed his eyes, fighting tears, and answered, "I never left." Years passed, and James began to feel the weight in his bones. The hands that once built swings and raised beams now trembled when holding a spoon. But he never complained. As long as he could care for Eleanor, he believed he still had purpose. Then came the coughing. At first he thought it was allergies. Maybe dust from the old shed where he still fixed chairs for the community shelter. But the cough didn't go away. Then came the chest pain, the weight loss, the sudden exhaustion just climbing the stairs. Emily, their youngest daughter, insisted he see a doctor. James resisted, like he always had. But when he began coughing up blood, there was no more room to delay. The diagnosis came cold, cruel, and blunt: advanced lung cancer. In the sterile light of the doctor's office, James simply lowered his head, not for himself, but for Eleanor. Who would care for her? Who would sweeten her tea? Who would tell her bedtime stories, even if she no longer understood the words? It was the first time in decades James cried. But the next morning, he got up as usual, put on his flannel shirt, placed his hat, and made breakfast. Eleanor was still there, waiting. And he was still her husband. The routine changed. Their children began rotating shifts to help. Nurses visited the house. But James insisted on one duty he would never give up: holding her hand every night, even through pain, even with fever. He said, "As long as I can squeeze her hand, we're still here." The nights grew quieter. James's body weakened quickly. Some days he couldn't get out of bed. But if Eleanor so much as murmured a sound, any sound, he found the strength to reach her. And there was one prayer he whispered every night, looking at the ceiling: "God, if it's my time, take me with her. Don't leave me here without my Ellie." Faith, which had always guided them, was now all they had left. There were no more healing treatments, no more promises of recovery, but there was love, and there was hope. And in James's heart, one unshakable truth: he wouldn't leave without her. That week, the house felt quieter than ever. The framed pictures on the walls, the dusty photo albums, the scent of chamomile tea. Everything remained in place. And yet something was different, as if time itself were simply waiting. James and Eleanor had celebrated their 74th wedding anniversary just 2 days before. The celebration was modest. Their children brought flowers. The grandchildren played guitar in the backyard. James sat beside Eleanor, holding her hand, both covered by a crocheted blanket made decades ago. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. A look was enough. That night, James didn't sleep. He stayed by the bed, watching Eleanor breathe. Weak, but watchful. As if every second was too precious to miss. The next morning, exactly at 7 a.m., Eleanor took her final breath. There was no visible pain, no agony, just a soft exhale, and silence. James didn't cry. He kissed her forehead, adjusted the sheet, and whispered, "Wait for me. Just a little longer." He didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't leave the room. He sat there, head bowed, his fingers still laced with hers, even without a response. Their children urged him to rest, but he only said, "She went first. Now it's my turn to wait for her." At 5 p.m. that same day, the heart monitor let out one final beep. James's heartbeat stopped like a candle snuffed out by the wind. The doctors said it was the heart. The grandchildren said it was love. They died in the same room, in the same bed, holding hands. The news spread through Amarillo like sunlight breaking through a cloudy morning. People stopped what they were doing. Neighbors embraced. Students at the community shelter observed a moment of silence. In a local classroom, a teacher told their story. Children cried without knowing why. Adults called their parents. Couples held hands. James and Eleanor left this world the way they had lived in it, together. And in that moment, the whole world seemed to remember that love, when it's true, doesn't end. After James and Eleanor passed away, their house remained closed for a few days. The flowers on the porch wilted in silence. The swing beneath the oak tree swayed gently in the wind, as if still waiting for someone to sit down. And inside the house, the absence echoed. Their children held the memorial in the backyard. No other place felt right. Beneath the tree where the grandchildren once played, where Eleanor hung Christmas lights and James told cowboy tales, 2 empty chairs were placed, side by side. The chairs they always used. And around them, people. Many people. Neighbors came. Former volunteers. Mothers helped by the shelter. Children who were now grown adults. Men who once learned from James how to plant, fix, and start over. A man who had stayed there 30 years earlier said, "They didn't just give me a roof. They taught me I deserved to exist." During the ceremony, a deep silence fell. But it wasn't grief. It was reverence. Gratitude. As if everyone there understood they were witnessing something rare. A story that time would never erase. Emily, the youngest daughter, read a letter her father had written shortly before falling ill. In it, he wrote, "If you're reading this and I'm no longer here, don't cry. If I've gone, it's with a full heart. Because I loved. Because I was loved. And because I had the privilege of living and dying beside the same woman." Her voice trembled as she read it aloud, breaking into sobs. At the end, no one applauded. Only the wind through the trees was heard, as if even nature stood in quiet respect. After the burial, the house was reopened. The grandchildren wandered from room to room, touching furniture, books, fingerprints on glass. Every detail told a story. In their bedroom, the wall clock had stopped exactly at 5:05 p.m. The exact moment James passed. But what struck everyone most was the silence from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. that day. 10 full hours where James sat beside her, without moving a muscle, without speaking a word, without shedding a tear. 10 hours of silence, as if he was waiting, keeping a promise only the two of them understood. The promise to never let her be alone, not in life, nor after. And in that silence, there was more love than in 1,000 declarations. In the months following James and Eleanor's passing, something unusual happened in Amarillo. It wasn't sadness that lingered in the air. It was something else. A kind of reverent calm, as if everyone in town understood they had witnessed something rare, almost sacred. The couple's home became a living memorial. Their grandchildren, with support from the community, decided to keep everything exactly as it was. The furniture, the framed photos, the love notes tucked on the bookshelf. In the garden, they restored the old oak swing. And on the porch, they placed a hand-carved wooden sign. James and Eleanor Carter, where love learned to outlive time. Every Sunday, visitors from other towns came to see the place. Families took pictures, couples hugged tighter. Teachers brought students to share the story of a love that had endured war, illness, decades, and even death. The Hope and Hearth Shelter, founded by them, flourished. Donations poured in from across the country. New wings were built in James and Eleanor's name. Young people who once lived on the streets now studied, worked, and proudly told how they were inspired by a couple who never met them, but loved them anyway. Sarah, their eldest daughter, said in an interview, "My parents didn't leave behind money. They left behind something priceless. They proved that love is a real force." And that's what remained. The story of James and Eleanor began to appear in podcasts, books, and documentaries, not because they were famous, but because they represented everything the modern world had forgotten. The beauty of everyday care, of quiet faith, of constant presence. In a world rushing forward, they stood still. In a time of noise, they listened. And together, they built a love so deep, even time had to bow before it. Some say that on certain afternoons, soft laughter can still be heard from the backyard, and that when the wind blows, the old swing moves on its own, as if someone were still there, smiling, loving, waiting. Because maybe true love never really leaves.